Now, Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon.
Bonjour et bienvenue to Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon, or as we say in English, welcome to Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. Today is, of course, May 7th, 2020, and I mention it because on May 7th, 1951, Bernie Marsden was born. And so here is part 2 of my Bernie Marsden interview. And I say thank you to Bernie for having stuck around for so long. But I also say happy birthday to Bernie. Now, he is doing the rounds talking about his new book, or the reprinting, the reedition of Where Is My Guitar? An Inside Story of British Rock and Roll. If you haven't checked out the book, I do recommend that you do that. But for those of you that are wondering why are we having a part 1 and a part 2, well, I will explain. At the end of part 1, the telephony system gave out on us, and the interview just stopped abruptly. And I thought, hey, why not do a part 1 and a part 2 just to make it easier on everybody? So this conversation does pick up midstream, so to speak. If you want a little bit more of the context, head over to part 1, which you can find on whatever streaming service you're listening to, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or iHeart, or even on my YouTube page. Go find part 1. This is part 2. Like I said, we pick it up midstream. We recontextualize it just a little bit, and then we keep going. But on that, May 7th, 1951, guitar legend Bernie Marsden was born. And with that, happy birthday, Bernie. And here we go. Here is part 2. We are back with guitarist Bernie Marsden. He was in the middle of a great story. And of course, technology said, yeah, no, not going to hear it. But we're going to try again. So we were talking about how you were on these 5, 6, 7 Whitesnake albums, and people saw your face and name on a poster, or didn't see your face and name. So before you get started, I'll just start with this. There is sort of a 2-version band of Whitesnake. There is sort of the European Whitesnake. Even with the Slide It In album, there's 2 different versions. Whereas, folks in Europe love this bluesy early 80s thing. And then there's sort of the more, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but sort of the cotton candy American version. It's glitzy, it's glamoury, it's got all kinds of keyboards and sweetness to it, which of course has been very, very popular. And of course I love. I mean, the Whitesnake 87 album was one of the best.
The best analogy I always say these days is I use Fleetwood Mac. There's Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, and then there's Fleetwood Mac. Right.
There's those 2. Okay, so let me try to restart this conversation with the Whitesnake stuff, and then we'll get back to M3 and what happened and all that stuff there. But when you get to recording Snakebite, and then of course Trouble, which is the first full length, were you going it with Neil and John and Mickey and David as, we are Whitesnake, this is a band, or was there a perception from the beginning that you were just sort of pieces on a chessboard and David would move you? And boy, that sounds horrible, but you know what I mean? Were you a band or were you David's project? What was sort of the feeling within you and Mickey and Neil going into this?
There was it was the opposite of what it became of the chessboard. It really was a band, to the point where David didn't even want his name featured on the billing. But we said, no, you're the guy from Deep Purple. We're guys from working, street bands. We've all been around, but you're the guy from Deep Purple, so your name has to go on it. So that's why it became David Coverdale's Whitesnake. The rest of us, we just wanted to write good stuff, but it did turn into like Coverdale, Marsden, and Moody as the creative force until John joined the band. It was always the 3 of us putting stuff together, and then we'd go in the studio with the rest of the guys and go on the road and do shows. So that was the early time.
And it was a good time. All right. So last year,
there were no ego problems really. We had numerous. I think we had 3 keyboard players very quickly, but that was because John was always in the background. And what are you going to do when you got John Lord in the background? When I knew him really well, David knew him really well, and he comes to a gig and says, "Oh, very good band," So, well, why don't you join, John? So that was it. So that was, obviously after Pace Ashton Lord and stuff. So it was easy. The camaraderie was really good, and that lasted really up until the Saints and Sinners period. There was as I say in the book, in Where's My Guitar, the beginning of the end really started when we did Come and Get It at John Lennon's place. Well, it was Ringo Starr's house at the time. Sorry about the name drop there.
That's okay. You've played with Zach, so why not?
I know, yeah, and Ringo, yeah.
That's right.
And but John and Ian lived within kind of driving distance to the house, and they didn't stay. So that was the first time that we hadn't creatively put an album together while we were all together. And when I look back, hindsight is a very easy thing and, a very useful thing. But when I look back on it now, it was really, that was the beginning of the last part of that period when we were really, really together, when we would put an idea down. And, when you have a good idea for a tune and Ian Pace is the drummer, you know what you're going to get. And you're going to get it, and it's going to be better than even you think. Same with John Lord, same with David Coverdale. No matter how good the backing tracks were, once we finished in the studio, especially with Ready and Willing, when you know that David Coverdale is going to be singing on top of all that, you're just looking at each other and smiling. So that was the camaraderie, and that did disintegrate towards but only really right at the end of Saints and Sinners. When things were really falling apart, literally. And I, as I say in the book, I was the instigator of most of the demise in a way, because I looked at David, the two of us in a studio that belonged to the Pink Floyd, and I looked at him and I said, you know what, we might as well pack this in. I think nobody really cares anymore. And he looked at me with a great sigh of relief on his face, saying, are you thinking it as well? So we'd both been thinking the same thing. Unfortunately, that did culminate in the band breaking up. But, it's one of those things you look back on and go, well, I think we went as far as we could anyway. I'm Slide It In is a different record to me, and I'm kind of glad I'm not part of it, with all due respect. I bowed out with Saints and Sinners with Here I Go Again and That'll Do Me kind of thing. But it did seem, when I look back now, it could have been one of the great. It became a very big band, and people say, doesn't it drive you crazy to see Whitesnake so popular in America in the 90s and stuff? And I said, no, it's like I can listen to the Whitesnake 87 album or go see them live as if I'm going to see Neil Schon with Journey or Foreigner, Toto with Steve and everybody, because they're just a different band now. The strange thing is, I loved all those bands whilst I was part of Whitesnake with David, and he would poo-poo me for saying, why do you listen to all that pop shit? i.e. Toto. And he ends up becoming, one of the biggest pop groups in America, which I always found, quietly ironic.
And you can never go wrong with Steve Lukather. He's one of the greatest. All right, so
one of my best friends.
Oh, he is so incredibly nice. And I sort of have the same kind of story with him that I do with Joe. He was following me on Twitter, and then the next thing we did an interview. Anyway, it's just that Twitter has been a boon for me. But okay, last year at the Steelhouse Festival Away Day, you performed Ready and Willing full. You did an album show. When you look back at your time with Whitesnake, I'm assuming by the fact that that's the one you chose to do in full, that's the one that stands out. So what makes Ready and Willing so special to you? And is that sort of the crown jewel in your Whitesnake career?
I think the reason I'm so close to it is because of, it was Ian's first record. I think we'd kind of reached a very high level of songwriting and performance, and then it became the breakthrough album that put us in the charts and put us into the national, eye level. Really, we'd done good shows before that, but Ready and Willing put us into, I think it went in at number 3 or something in the charts, and suddenly we were doing, whole sellout European tours and stuff. Then we toured with AC/DC at the end of it, and that was pretty good as well. So that helped in Europe. that broke us very big in Europe. So I always look back at Ready and Willing with great love, and I think it's a really good, strong rock blues album. So I thought it'd be a good one to do in its entirety. And I have to tell you, we were in this place that holds, I think, about 1,500 people in Cardiff, and the Tram Shed, which was a fantastic evening. And my daughters were there with a few friends. And when we began, my youngest daughter went to the sound desk to say, is there something wrong with the sound? And what it was, she had never experienced 1,500 people singing every word of every song before at one of her dad's concerts.
And it's remarkable.
The volume in the room was fantastic. And they thought it was a distortion of the PA system, but it wasn't. It was the people enjoying themselves.
If we get to have shows again, is that something you'd like to do more of, and maybe consider doing Love Hunter and some of the other ones and perform them?
Why not? Yeah, I think we did the album literally track one to the last track, and then we did Ain't No Love, and we did a few other things, and the feeling in the room, Mitch, was just unbelievable, and was so the answer to that is absolutely yes. And with what else is going on, literally all over the world at the moment, I think I can't think of anything better than to go out and play the music that people want to hear, and people to enjoy themselves in arm in arm kind of thing. And I hope that comes to pass. Maybe not this year, but maybe in a year's time. Who knows? We're not clever enough. We wait for the academics to sort that out, don't we?
Yeah, we do, and hopefully we'll get back to shows and stuff. There will be some changes, but whatever. It's better than nothing. So I'm going to ask you two things about Ready and Willing. Of course, you have a Fool for Your Loving, which to me, I think the original versions are the better versions because there's more sort of heart and soul in them, if I can express it that way.
Yeah. I think so, yeah.
How do you take the remakes? Do you look at that as a compliment to the songwriting and to the performance and say, hey, David really loves these songs, that he's going to do them again? Or do you take it as, what, we weren't good enough, so now you have to... How do you sort of take that? Because there are two ways. I see you as being a positive person and would see it more as a compliment, but how do you sort of... And what do you think of the Steve Vai version?
I listen to it as a good modern rock record, and Steve is a fantastic guitar player. People say, "Oh, did you see the video? This ridiculous guitar solo." I said, "Well, really, like he's praying to the guitar," and I hadn't seen it at that point, and and I don't think. I mean, that's performance. That's people doing a. As far as I know, the director of that video said, "Steve, I want you to do this." And I think he did say to me once, I think he sort of smiled at me once at a festival in Germany and said, "Sorry about the solo," that kind of thing, But there's nothing about it. It makes you laugh, and I respect him so much as a guitar player. I think that David were, or somebody within the record companies at the time has just said, "Look, there's some fantastic songs in this back catalogue, that in America people have never heard." And "Fool for Your Loving" was obviously, the one to go for. And then the other one, as we all know, which has become pretty anthemic. So I know that I think it was one of the people at Geffen Records who had heard Here I Go Again on Saints and Sinners and said, sort this one out, let's rearrange this and put it into 1980s, and you have a number one record, which was absolutely correct. So I can listen to that. People say, well, of course you can, because, the X factor of cash is, important, which of course it is, but a good song is still a good song, whether it sells 100 or whether it sells 1 million. They wanted to write another one. I said, I wish it was that easy, but
if only,
yeah. People could say, people go, oh, you must have been lucky to have. I don't think luck comes into it. There's, a good song is a good song, and David and I wrote that song with, and we recorded it the best way we thought it could at the time. And I'm sure that when they remade it, they did it the best way they thought they could then. And as such, millions and millions of people went out and bought it. So I'm not going to make any judgment either way on that. It continues to be popular. People know me for it, and I can play it, just me and an acoustic guitar. And, people get very teary-eyed sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. All right, so let's. I don't know how much more time you have, but I'll ask you this.
I'm good.
Oh, good, because I've got a few. One of the players, if you want, in the whole making of those Whitesnake's albums was, of course, producer Martin Birch. You used him all the way through. Some might say that's a good thing. Some might say, well, sometimes you got to change the ears. I personally think it's a great thing. What did he bring to the band? Because yes, you're playing guitar, and yes, David's singing, but ultimately it's the team. And what did he bring to the team?
Martin Birch was the 7th member of Whitesnake. Simple as that. And don't forget that John and Ian and David had worked with Martin all through the Purple era. David only knew Martin Birch as a producer from the day he joined Deep Purple. So it was a slam dunk that Martin would be involved in working with the new lineup, the new band, and because of the connection between myself and Pace Ashton Lord, him with David with Deep Purple. So when we kind of called up together and said, get involved in this, and he was the guy that we all had total respect for because of his back catalogue. And I could not get enough of Martin. How did Peter Green do this with Fleetwood Mac? How did Peter do this? Is this like Peter would do, kind of thing? To the point where he would say, I'd do a solo, and he'd say, do you think Peter would have played that? Which is his way of saying far too many notes, and we just understood each other. And the fact that Martin wasn't involved with Saints and Sinners, I think, is connected to the demise of that lineup, because Martin had gone by then because the management wouldn't come up with a deal that suited him and his people, and so he was off working with some unknown little band called Iron Maiden. And, I don't blame him for going. The deal was the deal. He'd worked with Rainbow as well, and his input on stuff is just so important. Don't Break My Heart Again is a good example. The guitar solo on Don't Break My Heart Again is me running through to get a sound. And I finished the solo, and he said, thank you very much.
There you go.
See you later.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny, by the way, every time you mention one of these songs, I start singing it in my head. It's very distracting. It's incredibly distracting. Okay.
He have another 6 goes at doing a solo on Don't Break My Heart Again. And he just give me that look of his, which was fantastic, and go, back to number 1? And I go, yeah, okay. And that was it. So that's how important he was, and that's why he did my solo album with me. And I think we just missed him as that 7th member, when, even though the guy that we had was very competent and, easy to work with, but it wasn't Martin. And, the sessions at Tittenhurst Park, with Martin for Come and Get It, and we mixed a lot of the live album at Tittenhurst as well. The moment it could only be me and Martin in the studio, or David and Martin, or whatever, but it was still Whitesnake. There was that feeling. It was, he was a very, very important part of it, and a wonderful producer. And I'd like to think that maybe when we are too old, we'll get together to do something again at one point.
Yeah, that would be great. Talk to me then, because you mentioned that he would give you that look when he heard what he wanted to hear. Talk to me about record making back then compared to now. Now we spend so much time with second guessing and auto tuning and flying in and flying out and blah, 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 pro tooling this and pro tooling that. You look at the early Sabbath, you look at the early Whitesnake, you look at the early whatevers. They showed up to the studio, and 9 hours later they had an album. How do you sort of look at it now? Is technology in 2020 your friend when recording, or have we just gotten to the point where we've taken out, and I've said it before, the heart and soul? Have we sanitized music too much?
I don't think so. I think if in 1975 we could have had the quality or the versatility of digital recording, I think we'd have all taken it. It's only because it's like the guys who are working, the Beatles had to work 2-track, and then the magic of 4-track. Well, by the time I began recording, it was 16-track. Well, maybe 8, but 16, and then it went to 24. And it was, so there's no difference really. I think you work with what you have, but the big difference is there's 6 people in the studio working together with the producer or the engineer. And I think some of that has lost its focus. Purely because you don't have to be there. I mean, I'm in and out of the studio all the time now, like with Joe Loss. last year. Well, this year in January. It's impossible that Joe and I were still working on his album in January. Seems like 5 years ago at the moment. But we worked in Abbey Road, digital and analog. And it sounds great, and I've heard some of the stuff already, which is absolutely amazing. And I think anything that makes the sound of a record better is good. Whether it's better than Ready and Willing in sound quality or not, well, then a technical boffin will have to tell you the difference. And I know that the records, when I made an album called Shine about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes, with a version of Trouble on it with David singing.
The Trouble, yeah. And we cut that onto vinyl at Abbey Road. And if I play that vinyl on my system here, the vinyl copy, that sounds like the record I made in Abbey Road. The CD is great. It's very versatile. Obviously, you can put it in your car or take it anywhere with you. Download, you can take anything like that. But the record I made is when you put like a stylus on those grooves. Maybe I'm probably nostalgic, old-fashioned or whatever. But to me, when I put that on and play it, not ever so loud, but nice and solid, that's the record that I can remember making at Abbey Road. And I think that's important. I think Joe's captures some of that with the record that we did, that we've written together this year.
This year. So, but I'm also talking about our sort of 2020 desire to make everything perfect. You look back at the early Whitesnake and the early Sabbath, and sometimes the drummer's going too fast, and sometimes the guitarist hits a bum note, and sometimes the vocal's a little, whatever. But that made it magical. Have we gone too far in terms of trying to make everything perfect, perfectly in pitch?
I think I would agree with you to quite a large aspect on that. I know there's stuff on some of them. Only I know, or we, the ones that were there at the moment, there's certain parts where you go, well, we could have done that again. But if we'd have done that again, we would have lost the 90% that was right. And I think sometimes, and that's where going back again to Martin Birch, that's where the producer comes in and says, no, you've got it. That's the track. We're going to work on that, And unless it was blatantly wrong, obviously, it always worked out. And the fact that you can do, I use the digital age, obviously, because when I record these days, and if I like a section, we'll say, well, let's repeat that section and just cut it in from, bar 64 to bar 94, whatever. But I don't really know how to do it. That's the engineer's job, And if I then go and sing another verse, can I do another verse there? And they go, yeah. Well, how do I do that? So, well, we just cut and paste this. Oh, I go. Well, not so much now, but that was a few years ago. But it still fascinates me, to be honest with you.
It does to me too. And a good friend of mine is Alan Niven, and here's my name drop for the day, manager of Guns N' Roses. And he always says to me, there is a perfection in the imperfection. And it's like, yeah, you're right. There is.
I would definitely agree with that. Yeah. That's very good word.
It's so eloquently put. Now we've mentioned a whole bunch of stuff, so we'll look at the Malice in Wonderland. We'll look at all that stuff. We know the story. It's written in the book, and Classic Rock and the other websites talked about from your book about how the Whitesnake ended and so on and so forth. What's not as apparent is, to me at least, is how did sort of you decide, because you do Malice in Wonderland in 77, and then after that you're going into Whitesnake. How did that become, how did you join Whitesnake? Was it just a progression of being friends with David and eventually it was like, all right, let's get on with it? Or did you have to audition? Was there, hey, by the way, we should form a band? How did it sort of become? How did you become Whitesnake?
Well, while we were recording Malice in Wonderland, David lived about an hour from Munich, the studio. So while we were there, we were there for about 4 months. He came to see John and Ian to say hi. And I suspect now, looking back, to have a nose around to see what they were doing, really. But that's when we met. We sat down together, had a cup of tea together or whatever, a beer or whatever it was. And we kind of understood each other pretty much straight off, He had been the new boy in Deep Purple. I was the unknown factor of Pace Ashton Lord. He doesn't have any brothers or sisters. Neither do I. We both like the same people. We're the same age. We grew up with the Eric Claptons, the Peter Greens, the John Mayalls, and we got along in a very quick period of time, but that was only in one afternoon in the sunshine of Munich. Then the Pace Ashton Lord album came out, and obviously he got a copy of that, and he heard me as a kind of a slick session player. Okay, so fast forward about 6 months, Pace Ashton Lord has come to an end. I was managed within the Deep Purple office, and people were talking this, talking that. He came in and said, "Oh, David Coverdale's coming over to London. You should meet up." And I said, "Yeah, that'd be nice." But that night, I went to see a great Scottish singer called Frankie Miller. And Mickey Moody was playing guitar for Frankie Miller at the time. So I went to the Rainbow in London, a legendary gig. And I walked into the foyer to pick up my passes. And I literally bumped into David, who was there to see the gig, to see Mickey. And he said, "Oh, hello, how are you? Da-da-da, well, nice to see you." And then he said, "I hear that," and he called it Place Haddock and Cod, which is 3 fish and chip shop items, right?
Right. Well,
he said, "I hear that Place Haddock and Cod has ended." And I said, "Yeah, that's true. That's true." And then he said, "I also hear," he said, "that you might be joining Macca's band." So that's when that whole thing with Wings was going on. And I said, "Well, that was a couple of weeks ago or maybe a month ago, and nothing's really happening." And he said, "Well, I'm putting a band together." He said, "Why don't you come down tomorrow? I'd like your input on the drummer and bass player situation because you've worked with Ian and Cozy." I said, "Okay, fine." And as I walked away, he went one way to the gig, I went to another. He said, "Bring your guitar." The next day, this drummer and bass player, who I have no idea who they were playing. Mickey was there. I plugged in with my guitar into another amplifier, and we started to play, and we just jammed in a kind of Allman Brothers style. The two of us, and bear in mind, Mickey and I had never played together before. And we played for about what seemed like, 15 minutes, maybe half an hour. And what we didn't realize that David had walked in the door at the other end of the rehearsal room. And when we finished playing, just basically to have a break, we heard this applause, this clapping coming from the other end of the room. And he came over to me and he said, he ignored the other guys. He said, "Can I have a word with you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I had no idea you played the guitar like this." So I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, I've just got the Pace Ashton Lord album. And, it sounds like, you're a seasoned session player. That's what I thought you did." I said, "No." I said, "That's the exact opposite of what it is." He said, "Well, I know that now. I've just been listening to you play for 15 minutes. And then he said, "Look, I don't know what Mac has offered you. I probably can't match his offer, but I would love you to be part of this new band." And I said, "Well, you can match the offer because there is no offer." So that's how it began.
that's a great story. So, it turned out well. Now, just real quick on that, we mentioned, of course, Tony Ashton, and I'm just going to throw this out for fans. If you can track down an album called Tony and Ashton and Friends Live at Abbey Road 2000, Company of Snakes do a few songs on there. The Here I Go Again, and all this, they just sound great. That is such a great little collector's item. So for people, instead of collecting guitars, if you're collecting CDs, go get this album. It's a bit tough to find, but it's on the internet, eBay and Discogs and all those places. But what a great
DVD.
Yeah, that's right. There's a DVD. What a great evening that was. I mean,
yeah, it was special because Tony, bless him, was pretty ill by then, and we, everybody kind of knew what was going to happen. But we had this great evening, and Jeff Emmerich engineered the whole thing, the Beatles guy.
Yep.
And when we recorded that version of John and I doing Here I Go Again, just the two of us, that was done because there was a technical breakdown. So we just had to do something at the time, so that we were kind of thrown in. Well, that's become very, very popular on the internet. And then Jeff Emery, I went in to say, "That's one of the sweetest things I've ever heard," he said. And I only then found out that it was Jeff Emery in the control room. So these things that go on, I don't think that's even in the book, actually. So
yeah,
that was a special night. That was a night to create some kind of security for Tony for what turned out to be not very long.
Yeah, rest his soul. But
yeah. You have to read the book. People have to read the book for Tony, don't they?
Yeah, they do. But that just that version though, and that entire CD is magical. There's a sense of, I don't even know. There's just a magic to it. You can tell that there was a love in that room, and it comes. When you have the passion in you, the music. There's intangibles in music that people always talk about.
There were a lot of very famous people at that gig, who had all contributed to the input of it. And John Entwistle was there, and for one, but when the five of us got on stage to play for the first time in all those years with Robert Hart singing, there was an audible sort of sigh in the room, and then the warmth as we started to play those Whitesnake classic tunes. It was tangible. It was, you could really feel the love in the room for the music. And I'm just sorry that David wasn't there, really. Robert Hart, is a good friend of mine. He did a good job and everything. But to have the rest of us there with him singing would have been, it wouldn't have been just the icing on the cake. But of course, that's never been going to be able to happen now because John's gone.
Well, it's yeah. Anyway, for collectors, go find that. It's really a great piece to have.
It's called Endangered Species, isn't it?
Well, there's different versions running around, but there is one just called Live at Abbey Road 2000.
Oh, okay.
So, but at this point, it's hard to differentiate what is the official release and what's become sort of people knocking it off and stuff. But all right, okay. So we've danced around "Here I Go Again." So let me ask you this: it is the song, it is the one that you perform. If you look at the Moody Marsden stuff, the live album stuff, it comes up over and over again. I do want to ask you about the lyric, though. We all know that Hobo became Drifter. What I find interesting, though, is in concert now, you've started saying Drifter instead of Hobo. Right? Is that a way of saying this is a better lyric? Or is that just saying this is the more popular version? Talk to me about you actually taking on the new version or the new lyrical content.
I'll be absolutely straight with you. Sometimes I do it without even thinking, and sometimes I do it purposely. Well, each of the two choruses, I sing Hobo on one and Drifter on the other, and it's merely because the Hobo version is the original, and that gets a cheer, especially in the UK. And if I do the other one, that also gets a cheer because it's a recognition of the success of that version. So that's the reason why. And it was changed by the record company in America. It was nothing to do with me. Nobody asked me. Just suddenly I hear the record and it's like a hobo. No, like a drifter. I was born to walk alone, which makes sense. Hobo in England is what a drifter is. As you probably.
In Canada too, we had a great TV show called The Littlest Hobo about a German shepherd running around. What a concept for a show!
Well, it was politically deemed that hobo
rhymed with, right? So, which listen, contextually in 1986, 87,
I suppose so.
In 2020 we might say really. In 1987, really? You probably go, okay, I get it. Was it right? Probably not, but I get it. Okay.
It's important, or is it important? In this, especially in the light of the first 3 months, 4 months of this year. It's one of those things. Say, well, like you say, well, it makes me laugh. I smile because it makes me smile on stage if I do it either way, because you can see the anticipation, especially when I'm in a room. You say we've been 400 or 500 people. They're thinking, what's he going to sing? And if I do the one around the wrong, if I sing Drifter first, they say, oh, he's forgotten, and I do Hobo the second time. So it's a bit of a little silly game in a way.
Well, here's how you solve this. You start every set with "Here I Go Again," the '82 version, and you in the encores you finish with the '87 version, and everybody wins. Everybody wins.
Yeah.
Listen, I could do this forever, so I'll start winding down. I'll ask a couple
Okay.
more questions, and then we will consider a part two. But
Yeah, you're welcome.
yeah, by the way, this has been spectacular for me. But okay, we've touched upon the fact that we said it before. There's sort of the UK version, and where was the, for the lack of a better word, the disconnect with the American audiences in the early 80s? You know, Ozzy Osbourne is coming over with Randy, and he's doing great stuff. Black Sabbath with Dio, they're coming over, they're doing great stuff. Def Leppard come over, Pyromania, great stuff. Why was Whitesnake not getting that reception from the American audience? Why did it sort of take, you know, the cotton candy? Why were you not connecting with American audiences?
Well, in Where's My Guitar, I go into it, and I don't want to point fingers of blame, because there's always either, you know, looking at somebody to blame. But I will say there's always a but, isn't there? You know, we were signed to what we thought was Atlantic Records in America. And we became very excited, and that was really cool. When we got the deal done with Reddy and William, and the record came out, we were with a company called Mirage, which was a subsidiary of Atlantic Records and didn't have the clout and the power to work the record. So we were in the States. If you tie that up with very poor management and routing on tours where we we had a great time. We did a tour with Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, which David called the heavy metal sandwich, because we were on in the middle. And then we did another tour with Jethro Tull, totally unsuitable. But we went down really well, and I get emails on a daily basis from people in North America who say they were there, man, and this was one of the greatest gigs I ever saw. We were like a bunch of, 25, 6-year-old pirates on the road. And it shows, because we just really... But the thing is, what people don't realize, at the time, we were headlining all over Europe and Japan. So being in America and playing first or second to somebody, there's nothing wrong with that at all. We've never had a problem with that. But to the audience that would go, well, who are these guys? And nobody ever mentioned that 3 of the guys from Whitesnake were from Deep Purple. So that wasn't used. And so that just shows you how poor our management was at the time, to not instill into the record label, well, you've got to use this fact that John Lord, Ian Pace, and David Coverdale are going to be opening up in Norman, Oklahoma for Jethro Tull. But that never happened. And so we were spending, Ian Pace being more financially astute than the rest of us, said, do you realize that all the money we made in Japan, we've just burned on the first 4 weeks of this American tour? This is crazy. So by the time we got, I think, to Buffalo, and we did a show there, we were only a couple of hours or whatever to get back to New York. And we said, you know what, let's go home. We came home, and then we played to something like 125,000 people with AC/DC at the Donington Park Festival. So everything was kind of back to normal. So that's the reason why I put down the fact that those songs never reached the American audiences the first time around. And after the Jethro Tull tour and the Iron Maiden, we just didn't bother going back to America anymore.
Yeah, it's amazing, because you if David hadn't done that 87 album, Whitesnake would have been essentially the next Status Quo, the band.
I was just about to say, we were like, we kind of had the experience of Status Quo doing the same thing in the previous 5 years, being massive in Europe, but trying to break America without the backup support of a team, a really good team behind the band. And we were never, socially aware enough for whatever, obviously, like these days. But you just did depend on your local guys, your local radio stuff. And we'd be everywhere. And suddenly somebody would come and say, is John Lord really here? And they say, yeah. So could we talk to him? But by then, we were moving on to the next town the next day. So it was a very poor situation. And looking back on it, it was an absolutely crazy situation. But of course, at the time, until Ian, sort of said, look, lads, I've just worked this out. We've just spent XXX of all the money that we had coming to us. Little did we know we didn't really have any money coming to us. But that's another story.
That's another story.
And that's another. But that was the reason why we never broke in America. We were certainly made for America. If we'd have toured with AC/DC in America or with the Allman Brothers Band, I think we'll be talking very much differently.
Very differently. And,
point.
I'm assuming you must know the band Thunder from the UK and the singer Danny
Yep.
Bowes.
Yep.
I asked him the same question, and he said, you know what? We stuck to our guns with our British management, our UK management. We probably should have gotten US managers. And it sounds to me as though you probably should have done the same thing and gotten a US team and not try to...
Except the fact was we had a deal with the guys that we had here in the UK that was immovable. And so they would rather have broken... Well, they did, in fact, break up the band rather than let it go to anybody else. That's effectively what David had to do. And I don't blame him for that, because, after that it became a situation where he wanted to obviously continue his path. And unfortunately, that didn't include me, and it didn't include Neil Murray, and it didn't include... But I think we had the situation going. I talked... Adrian Smith is a good friend of mine from Maiden, and I talk a lot to Phil Collin, and when we meet up at gigs, and they all say the same thing. They just go, man, why was Whitesnake never bigger with you in America? And I just go, man, don't even go there. If we'd have had Iron Maiden's management even at the time, because they were hip to doing stuff with them, EMI didn't get behind us because we weren't signed to EMI in America. We were signed outside. It was just a European deal. And that's the story, really. It's kind of a sad story, but how can it be sad when you work out that Whitesnake is still filling stadiums today? So I can only talk from my Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac angle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And there's a lot of bands like that. You look at Tigers of Pantang. They had the same thing. They were doing great. They had anyway. Let me see. All right. I'll wrap up on this. We did talk about the Paul McCartney. That story for me, I know you touch about it in the book, but I get confused because when you look online, it says Bernie was fired. And you go, well, but he never joined. And then you go, and then you read other parts where you go, well, he never joined. So what was that like? And let's call it a flirtation if you want. What was that flirtation with the Paul McCartney band like? Because obviously at that time...
Oh, we can tidy that up. You can't be fired from something that you, A, were never part of. And B, I called their office up to say, look, thank you for considering me, but you have to unconsider me now because I'm forming a band with a guy from Deep Purple. So it was just one of those things, and as I've always stated, the chances are, is that Paul never even knew I was involved. It was only because Howie Casey had recommended me to the management there to replace Jimmy McCulloch, who was a good friend of mine. And they said, we've got just a guy. He sings, he writes, whatever. He sings, he's a good player. He can do this. He has no problems. He's a nice enough guy. And he'd be perfect for the band. And so I got this call from their office to go and see them. I had 2 meetings in MPL. And each one was saying, well, look, it's not an audition. Why don't you just get together with the band and with Paul and the guys and see how it goes. I said, yeah, that's great, And so 1 week went by, then another week, then another month. And by that time was when we were in the Rainbow situation. And David said, I said, well, look, this is going to be great. At the time, Mullikin Tire was number 1 in the charts over here, which wasn't exactly my Howlin' Wolf style of music. And I just thought, in fact, my girlfriend, who's now my wife of 40 years, said, looked at the Mullikin Tire video and she said, you're not going to do that, are you? And I said, no, I don't think so. So I just called them up on the Monday or whatever it was and said, thanks for the, for the potential of being part of this, but I have to tell you now that I'm going to be joining a band, forming a band with the guy from Deep Purple. So, I would look, in a way, in a CV, I could say, well, at least I was fired by Paul McCartney. I can't even say that.
I know. Well, we could. Nobody has to check.
That's the whole story there, Nick. So, in a way, I always say it's kind of a non-story because nothing really happened apart from the fact that I had meetings in their offices. I was called up specifically to do it, and I just had to say, well, no, I can't. I can't do it because I've got a new band going on, and that band turned out to be Whitesnake. So it looks like I was a genius.
Well, I would certainly agree. And speaking of genius, I will throw this out for the collectors as well. If you're looking for another good album, find Bernie Marsden and his acoustic band. The album's called Going to My Hometown. That is a roaring good time. That is. It just sounds like you're in a pub with your friends and just laying it down the line. It's a great fun thing. Listen, I could go on forever. I've got so many more things. We didn't cover UFO.
That is a good one, because that was recorded in a very small converted church with about 150 people. It really is very, very, very intimate.
Oh, it's great, and you can hear that on the recording. It just sounds like a good time. I mean, I don't want to get too cerebral on it, but it just sounds like a good time. Listen, there's so much to cover. We didn't cover UFO. I did want to ask a little bit about the whole Tony Martin thing, but I don't want to leave this on I want to leave this on a positive note. So let us leave it at that, and let's consider a part 2 at some point, because there's you see.
Well, let's do another one, and then we'll do something when Joe's album comes out, if you like.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, that's why at the beginning I said it's hard to know where to go with the interview, because there's just so much. I mean, I think that I'll just have to go through a calendar and go, okay, April 26, 1942. What we, one thing at a time. But anyway, thank you, sir. And for the record, the M3 record, which the live thing, I think it's great. I think it just sounds great. I know that it didn't last long and so on and so forth. But it does sound great, and to hear sort of the voice of Black Sabbath doing an evening of Whitesnake is trippy, man. It's a real trip. As we say in Montreal, merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, great. Let me turn this off.
This has been Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon. For more exclusive content and interviews, subscribe on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, and many more. Follow Mitch on all the socials, especially Twitter, @Mitch Lafon, and on Instagram, @Mitch_Lafon. Get your Mitch merch now at loudtracks.com/Mitch.